Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Tombstone Tourist. This week, I've returned to Hollywood Cemetery in Richmond, Virginia. Hollywood is one of Virginia's largest and most historic cemeteries. Resting within its 135 acres are some of our most notable citizens, including 6 Virginia governors, 2 Supreme Court justices, 2 United States presidents, James Monroe and John Tyler. Jefferson Davis, the only president of the Confederacy, is also resting here, along with more than 18,000 Confederate veterans, 3,000 of which fought at Gettysburg. Confederate General George Pickett is also buried here, along with the man that we're going to visit today, Major General J.E.B. Stuart. James Ewell Brown Stuart was born at Laurel Hill in Patrick County, Virginia on February 3, 1833. Even though none of the buildings remain at Laurel Hill, the site of the Stuart farm is preserved today as a historical site. Jeb was the 8th of Archibald and Elizabeth Stuart's 11 children, and as a youth, friends quickly started calling him Jeb, which was the initials of his given name. He was homeschooled by his mother until he was about 12 years old. Then at the age of 13, he left Laurel Hill to continue his education in nearby Wytheville, Virginia. Jeb turned out to be a very good student and enrolled in Emory and Henry College when he was only 15 years old. He remained at Emory and Henry until 1850, when he received an appointment to the United States Military Academy at West Point. Jeb was a popular student at West Point, and in 1852, Robert E. Lee was appointed superintendent of West Point, which was the same year that Lee's nephew, Fitzhugh Lee, entered the academy as a student. Jeb quickly became friends with Fitzhugh and was a guest of the Lee family on a number of occasions. At West Point, Jeb displayed superior horsemanship and was one of only 8 cadets to be appointed a cavalry officer. Upon graduating from West Point, he was commissioned as a second lieutenant and assigned to Fort Davis in Texas, and later to Fort Leavenworth in Kansas, where he served as the regimental quartermaster. In 1855, Jeb married Flora Cook, the daughter of General Philip St. George Cook. The newlyweds moved to Fort Riley, Kansas, where they remained for the next 3 years. During his time in Kansas, Jeb distinguished himself during the violence known as Bleeding Kansas, and in 1857, he was wounded at Solomon River during the battle with the Cheyenne. In addition to being a top-notch soldier, Jeb was also an accomplished businessman, and in 1859, he received a patent for the development of the saber hook, which was used to attach the saber to the belt. The government paid Jeb all of $5,000 for the right to use his invention. While in Washington negotiating with the government, John Brown conducted a raid on their arsenal in Harpers Ferry, and Jeb volunteered to be an aide to his old friend, Colonel Robert E. Lee. Jeb accompanied Lee to the arsenal, and upon arriving in Harpers Ferry, Jeb immediately recognized Old Man Brown from his days in Kansas. Lee's forces eventually captured Brown, who was quickly tried and hanged in nearby Charlestown. On April 22, 1861, Lieutenant Jeb Stuart was promoted to captain, but less than a month later, Virginia seceded from the Union, and Captain Stuart resigned his commission and joined the Confederate Army. Jeb Stuart was commissioned in the Confederate Army on May 10, 1861. His friend, now Major General Robert E. Lee, was commanding the Army of Northern Virginia and ordered Jeb to report to Colonel Thomas J. Jackson, who placed Stuart in charge of organizing the 1st Virginia Cavalry. Stuart's 1st Cavalry saw its first action at the Battle of First Manassas, and he was present on the battlefield when General Bernard B. proclaimed, "There stands Jackson like a stone wall." Stuart's cavalry tactics became legendary, and he quickly became Lee's top cavalry officer. He saw action in many of the war's major battles, including Gettysburg, the Peninsula Campaign, Fredericksburg, the Wilderness, and Antietam. In the spring of 1864, the Union Army decided to press the Confederates north of Richmond. They crossed the North Anna River and seized control of the Virginia Central Railroad at Beaver Dam. Pressing their advantage, Union forces advanced toward Richmond, where Stuart's cavalry was posted up just outside the city. On May 11, 1864, Union and Confederate forces, including Stuart's cavalry, clashed at an abandoned inn called Yellow Tavern, about 6 miles north of Richmond. Stuart led a charge which pressed the Union forces into retreat. While pursuing the retreating Union army, a 44-year-old Union private named John A. Huff turned and fired aimlessly at the pursuing Confederate forces. The round struck J.E.B. Stuart in the abdomen. A nearby Confederate named Gus Dorsey took the injured Stuart to the rear, where he was placed in an ambulance and taken to the home of his brother-in-law, Dr. Charles Brewer, in Richmond. While waiting for his wife Flora to arrive, Confederate President Jefferson Davis arrived to visit with Stuart. President Davis asked General Stuart, "How do you feel?" Stuart replied, "Easy, but willing to die, if God and my country think I've fulfilled my destiny and done my duty." A short time later, in the early afternoon of May 11, 1864, General J.E.B. Stuart uttered what would be his last words: "I am resigned. God's will be done." The next day, on May 12, 1864, at 7:38 p.m., 31-year-old General James Ewell Brown Stuart passed away. He was laid to rest here in Hollywood Cemetery. There are several other members of the Stuart family buried here with the general and his wife. This is our little Flora, who died at the age of 5 years old. And Bonnie, daughter of Charles and Maria Brewer, age 2 years old. And our little Jeb. Looks like 1 year, 10 months, and 14 days. And J.E.B. Stuart III, born July 8th, 1897, and died April 11th, 1990. Husband of Mary B. Hurt Stuart, July 15th, 1900 to January the 4th, 1992. And back here we have J.E.B. Stuart IV, Colonel, United States Army, born July 23rd, 1935, and died April 17th, 2020. J.E.B. Stuart is considered one of the greatest cavalry officers in American history. To honor him, a statue of Stuart on horseback was placed on Richmond's Monument Avenue. The statue was dedicated in 1907 and stood with statues of General Robert E. Lee, President Jefferson Davis, Matthew Fontaine Maury, and Stonewall Jackson. On June 7, 2020, after having stood for 113 years, the statue of General Stuart was removed. And over a period of time, the other 4 Confederate statues were also removed. At one time, there was some discussion about moving the Stuart statue to his birthplace at Laurel Hill. But so far, nothing has happened, and the statue is thought to be in storage at an undisclosed location. Well, I'm going to end this video here in Hollywood Cemetery in Richmond, Virginia. I hope if you ever find yourself in the Richmond area with some extra time on your hands, that you will consider visiting this beautiful and historic cemetery. Besides the notable people that are resting here, the cemetery art is nothing short of amazing. Now, until next time, please remember, life is a wonderful journey. Be sure to take time and enjoy it. And I'll see you down the road. So long, everybody.